The night was heavy. The wind howled through the window cracks and rain fell as if the sky wanted to wash away some hidden guilt. At the gate of the yellow house, the same one where 3 children had grown up among laughter and afternoon snacks, a suitcase was brutally thrown outside. The dry thud echoed through the wet street, waking neighbors and stirring whispers behind half-open curtains. "Traitor!" Alberto's voice, thick and full of fury, broke the night's silence. In the doorway, his silhouette seemed larger than normal, as if rage had inflated him. Lúcia, his wife, trembled, tears mixed with the rain streaming down her face. She tried to speak, but every word was swallowed by the screams. The children were there, 3 pairs of frightened and confused eyes. The oldest, Ricardo, kept his gaze hard, as if he had already chosen which side to take. The middle child, Patricia, hid behind her father, but silently repeated his gestures, almost like an obedient shadow. And the youngest, Gabriel, only 14 years old, looked at his mother like someone looking into an abyss, scared, but full of desire to get closer. "I swear I didn't do anything," Lúcia cried out. Her voice choked. "Alberto, for God's sake, listen to what I'm saying." But he wasn't listening. He didn't want to listen, and perhaps that was the cruelest part. The sentence had already been decreed before any defense. The neighbors whispered. Some came to their windows, others turned on their living room lights to watch the spectacle. For them, it was like watching free nighttime theater. But for Lúcia, it was her own crucifixion. "I would never betray you, or our family," she sobbed, kneeling on the cold sidewalk. "I dedicated my entire life to you." The youngest son, Gabriel, couldn't take it anymore. He took 2 steps forward, trying to cross the gap between him and his mother, but Ricardo grabbed him firmly by the arm. "No, Gabriel, don't fall for her lies." The boy looked at his brother, then at his father, and finally at his mother fallen on the ground, soaked with rain. The struggle within him was visible, but the pressure from the others was greater. He ended up backing away, swallowing his tears. Alberto went down the porch steps, walked to Lúcia, and kicked open the suitcase, underwear scattered across the soaked ground. He held up a crumpled piece of paper, an anonymous letter, hastily scribbled, denouncing a supposed affair. "Here's the proof. You embarrassed me, Lúcia. It's over." She tried to grab the paper, but he pulled it away first. "That's a lie," she screamed. "You know me, Alberto. You know I would never do this." But her husband had already made his decision. In front of the children, in front of the neighbors, in front of the world, she would be marked as the woman who cheated. Lúcia got up with difficulty, gathered some soaked clothes, and hugged the suitcase against her chest. For a moment, she raised her eyes to the children. She searched there for a crack of hope, a sign that at least one of them believed her. But she found only silence. Even Gabriel, the youngest, remained still, held by his brother's arm, his eyes teary. The sound of the gate slamming behind her was like a final verdict. The house she had helped build, brick by brick, now closed its doors to her. Without money, without defense, without dignity, everything had been torn from her in just a few minutes. She walked down the deserted street, dragging the heavy suitcase that was already leaving a trail of water. The sound of the wheels on the wet asphalt was like a metallic lament. With each step, she felt her heart break a little more. The memory of the small children running through the yard of the same house that now denied her shelter pierced her mind like daggers. How could they believe so quickly, she thought. Was my love worth nothing? Thunder tore through the sky. Lúcia stopped, looked back. From the corner, she could still see the yellowish light of the porch on. The silhouette of the 3 children was still there, motionless, as if it were a cruel painting. She wanted to scream, wanted to run back, wanted to tear from their lips a single word of trust, but she couldn't. Her feet refused to go back. With one last look, she turned and continued down the street. She didn't know where to go. She had no friends' houses, nowhere to run. The only thing she had was a shattered heart and a silent oath. One day, the truth would appear, and when that day came, she wouldn't beg anymore. She would simply show. The following dawn was cold and silent. Lúcia woke up in a borrowed room, provided by an elderly woman who found her sitting at the bus station, hugging the soaked suitcase. The mattress was thin, but she barely noticed. The weight inside her chest was much harder than any floor. As the sun rose timidly through the window cracks, her mind dragged her back to the years when she believed she had a solid life, an untouchable family. Lúcia met Alberto when she was young, at a town party. He was tall, full of dreams, and had that confident way of speaking that seemed to promise stability. She, raised in a simple family, saw in him a safe harbor. They married early. There was no luxury, but there was affection. The first house was small, with exposed bricks, but every corner was filled with laughter. Lúcia made sure to keep the home welcoming. Flowers in the yard, the smell of fresh bread in the oven, and tablecloths always clean. She believed that caring for the family was the most beautiful way to build love. When Ricardo was born, she spent entire nights awake, rocking the baby's cries, while Alberto studied to take a civil service exam. Later came Patricia, bringing with her the delicacy of a girl always surrounded by dolls. And finally, Gabriel, the youngest, the sweetest link in the family, with eyes that always sought his mother's as if they needed constant confirmation that the world was good. For decades, Lúcia dedicated herself entirely to them. She sacrificed personal dreams, set aside intimate desires. She never complained. Her pride was seeing the family gathered at the table, even if the meal was simple. In town, Alberto was respected. A serious man, hard-working, known for his rigid posture. But inside the house, despite moments of affection, he carried an authoritarian trait. He was the one who decided almost everything: where the children would study, how money would be spent, even who could or couldn't visit the house. Lúcia accepted it, believing it was his way of caring. She never imagined that this rigidity could one day turn into a weapon against her. She remembered her friends' invitations. Trips, dinners, courses. She always said no. My children need me. Alberto needs me. Time passed, and she gave up on herself, brick by brick, until only the version of her molded by the family's needs remained. There were nights when, alone in the kitchen, she thought, do they notice everything I do? Will they ever recognize it? But it was enough to hear the children's footsteps running down the hallway for the thought to dissipate. Their love was her reward. At least, that's what she believed. Now, lying on that borrowed mattress, what hurt most wasn't just the expulsion. It was the contrast. Years of sacrifice, of renunciation, of dedicated love, thrown in the trash in a few minutes, by an accusation without proof, by an anonymous letter. She remembered the children's small hands holding hers, Ricardo's first drawing for her, with scribbles saying, Mommy, the pink dress Patricia wore on her 5th birthday, sewn by her own hands, the way Gabriel fell asleep in her lap, even when grown, asking only that she stay there a little longer, and to think that, the night before, all of them looked at her as if she were a stranger. Worse, as if she were an enemy. It wasn't the loss of the house that hurt most. It wasn't the public shame. It was the invisible break with the children. Ricardo's look, hard and accusatory, burned in her memory. Patricia's silence, who didn't dare question anything, was a cold stab. And Gabriel, Gabriel. The image of him trying to run toward her, stopped by his brother, that memory would be both a thread of hope and constant torture. That morning, sitting on the edge of the mattress, Lúcia made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let the lie defeat her. They could call her whatever they wanted. They could turn their backs on her, but she knew who she was. And one day, all of them would know too. It wouldn't be easy. There was no money, no witnesses, no allies. But there was a truth inside her, and that truth would be her secret weapon. Lúcia took a deep breath, dried her eyes, and adjusted the suitcase. The world had rejected her. Now she would have to reinvent herself, alone. And deep in her heart, a single hope burned. One day, her children would see what she really was. Time, when you look back, has the power to reveal things that once seemed invisible. While Lúcia tried to adapt to her new reality, alone, working as a seamstress to survive, her mind couldn't stop revisiting the past. And in this painful exercise, she began to see the signs she once ignored. She remembered an afternoon when Gabriel came home from school with downcast eyes. He was only 12 years old and carried a folded paper in his pocket. Before he could show it, Alberto took the note from his hand. This isn't something for your mother to see. At the time, Lúcia didn't question it. She trusted that her husband was just protecting their son. But now, revisiting the scene, she felt a chill. What was on that paper? What secret could be so serious as not to reach her hands? There were also those anonymous calls. Always at night. The phone would ring, Lúcia would answer, but the line remained silent. Sometimes she heard labored breathing before the final click. Alberto said it was a prank, that it wasn't worth worrying about, and she believed him. But today, remembering. She realized maybe it was someone watching, testing, planting small seeds of doubt. Donna Marta, the neighbor across the street, used to cast suspicious looks. Once she said with a crooked smile, "A woman who's too dedicated ends up forgetting herself, and when she opens her eyes, it's too late." That day, Lúcia just laughed, thinking it was just another of Marta's malicious comments, who loved spreading rumors around the street. But now she understood. Marta knew something. Maybe she had seen things she didn't want to see. There was also Alberto's manner, which had subtly changed in recent years. He would come home and look at her like someone evaluating, not like someone loving. He commented on her clothes, said she didn't take care of herself like before. There was a tone of hidden contempt in banal phrases. Lúcia didn't notice the danger. She thought it was just the natural wear of marriage. But now she knew. It was preparation for the final blow. When someone wants to destroy, they first need to undermine the other's confidence. The children also began commenting that their father spent more time away, with excuses of meetings and commitments. She never suspected. In her naivety, she believed that when men worked hard, they were just trying to support the family. But what Alberto was actually supporting was another story, one she would only discover years later. While sewing dresses in her small rented room, memories came like stilettos. She wondered, how didn't I notice? How could I have been so blind? But it wasn't blindness. It was trust. It was love. It was the certainty that a family built with so much sacrifice couldn't fall apart suddenly. She never imagined that someone could be capable of setting up such a cruel farce, much less that this someone could be inside the house itself. In the midst of painful memories, there was one that kept her standing. Gabriel, the youngest. The image of him trying to run to her, that night of expulsion, was a lighthouse in the darkness. Maybe deep down, he had felt the truth. Maybe one day, he would be the one to open the doors of the past. Lúcia sighed deeply, closed the sewing scissors and looked out the window. Night was falling again, but now, in her mind, the pieces were beginning to fit together. The past wasn't just a wound. It was also the map that sooner or later would lead her back to the truth. That night wasn't just an expulsion. It was a spectacle of pain staged before everyone. Lúcia would never forget every second, every look, every word that was driven into her like a knife. As she dragged her suitcase to the street, neighbors accumulated at the windows. The rain didn't drive them away. On the contrary, it seemed to make them even more eager to witness the fall of someone who, until then, was considered the exemplary wife. "I always knew nobody's perfect," whispered Donna Marta, the neighbor across the street, hidden behind the curtain. Her eyes shone with the malice of someone who feeds on others' misfortune. The streetlights reflected in the water accumulated on the asphalt. Each puddle mirrored Lúcia's figure kneeling, begging, as if multiplying the scene in dozens of cruel reflections. But the largest audience wasn't outside. It was inside the house itself. Her children, her reason for existing, were now implacable judges. "Mom, how could you?" Patricia murmured, unable to sustain eye contact. "I didn't do anything," Lúcia responded, desperate, extending her hand to her daughter. "You know me, my daughter. You know who I am." But Ricardo, the oldest, interrupted her. "Stop, Mom. Don't try to justify yourself. We saw the evidence. Dad wouldn't make this up." Lúcia felt as if the ground had opened up. Ricardo had always been her right hand, the son who helped with chores, who brought her flowers from the garden. Now, he spat words sharp as blades. It was then that Gabriel, the youngest, took a step forward. His teary eyes begged for courage. He extended his hand, like someone defying the world to reach his mother. "Mom, I believe," he began to say, his voice failing, but he didn't finish. Ricardo grabbed him firmly by the arm. "No, Gabriel, don't fall for her lies." The father intervened, with a tone of final judgment. "If you take one more step, boy, you'll lose your own father's respect." Gabriel backed away, but his tears fell freely, silently, denouncing the war within him. Lúcia saw everything, and that interrupted gesture was engraved in her soul like an eternal scar. She tried once more. "For God's sake, look into my eyes. Do you really think I would be capable of destroying our family? I dedicated my entire life to you." Silence was the answer. A heavy, suffocating silence that said more than any word. Alberto slammed the gate shut. Behind him, the house remained lit, but to Lúcia, it seemed like an illuminated tomb. Everything she had built was inside there, but it no longer belonged to her. With the soaked suitcase and clothes scattered on the ground, Lúcia walked a few meters, stumbling over her own steps. The street was full of eyes. Some feigned pity, others satisfaction. But none approached. No one extended a hand. And it was like this, under the rain, with a broken heart, that she understood. At that moment she no longer had a home, no longer had a family, no longer had a name. Only solitude remained. Still at the corner, she stopped and looked back. At the window she saw Gabriel's outline, standing, as if he wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He was trapped in the silence of his father and brothers. It was there that Lúcia made the most intimate oath of her life. One day she would return, and when she returned, it wouldn't be to beg. It would be to show the truth. The first day away from home was a dive into emptiness. Lúcia woke up in a small room, peeling walls, where the only sound was the tick-tock of an old clock hanging on the wall. There was no children's laughter, no smell of fresh coffee, no familiar voices calling for her. There was only silence. She didn't have much money. She carried in her suitcase some clothes, few memories, and wounded dignity. She got work in a sewing workshop, where she spent hours bent over fabrics, mending dresses, adjusting pants, fixing zippers. Her hands, once soft, gained calluses, but she never complained. Every stitch was a reminder. She was alive. Every reel she saved was a brick in her future. And deep down, there was only one goal. One day, return and clear her name. During those 6 years, some men approached. Work colleagues, neighbors, even workshop clients. All received the same polite smile and the same gentle no. She didn't want to. She couldn't. Her heart was entirely focused on one mission, proving the truth. There was no room for distractions. She had become, without realizing it, a guardian of silence and hope. At night, after work, she would sit alone with a box of memories. In it, she kept old letters, photos of the children when small, school notes. Some tears always wet those memories. But instead of weakening her, that strengthened her. I'm still their mother. I'm still the woman who built this family. And one day, they'll know. Over time, she began collecting not just memories, but also evidence. She searched for old documents, revisited papers that Alberto had discarded. She made copies of records, requested statements, maintained discreet contacts with people who knew some stories. Everything was kept in a blue folder, which she hid like a treasure. It was her invisible armor. The years also transformed her appearance. Without realizing it, pain had given her new strength. Work made her firmer. Discipline brought her posture. Her hair, once neglected, was now well-groomed. Her clothes, simple but elegant, marked the change of someone who no longer let herself be erased. Lúcia was no longer the submissive woman who accepted everything silently. Now she was a woman who knew who she was and knew what she wanted. One night, looking at herself in the mirror, she was surprised. Her face still had marks of pain, but also a brightness she hadn't seen in years. She smiled, for the first time without effort. There, before her reflection, she spoke in a low voice. When I return, they won't recognize the same woman. And that promise became her greatest fuel. She didn't know when, but she was certain she would return. And when she returned, she wouldn't enter through the back door, nor with a suitcase thrown in the rain. She would return with her head held high, transformed. And in that instant, alone in the small room, Lúcia realized that exile wasn't just punishment. It was also the place where she was being forged. 6 years had passed. Time, which could have destroyed Lúcia, actually transformed her. Every tear, every sleepless night, every dress sewn, and every coin saved had built a new version of her. Stronger, more elegant, more self-possessed. On the morning she decided to return, the sun shone bright. She parked in front of the same house from which she had been expelled. But now she was no longer the soaked woman with clothes scattered in the street. She was behind the wheel of a new car, discreet but elegant. She got out slowly, in low heels and a blue dress that highlighted her upright posture. The neighbors, accustomed to the fragile and humiliated version, stopped. Mouths opened, whispers arose. It's her, she's back. Look at that, who would have thought? And for the first time in a long time, Lúcia didn't lower her eyes. She faced each one with serenity. She didn't need screams or explanations. Her simple presence already spoke loudly. Patricia was the first to see her. She opened the bedroom window and froze at the scene. She ran inside, calling her father. A few seconds later, Alberto appeared at the door. His mistress, Husara, was right behind, her face tired, marked by the wrinkles of someone who lives in constant tension. The brightness she once displayed had faded. Alberto, on the other hand, tried to maintain his firm posture, but his eyes couldn't hide the astonishment. This wasn't the woman he had expelled. It was another, more beautiful, more confident, more alive than ever. "What did you come here to do?" he shot, but his voice trembled slightly. Lúcia took a deep breath. "I came to see my children." The children came out gradually, Ricardo with a suspicious look, Patricia hesitant, and Gabriel, now 20 years old, taller but with the same sweet look. Lucia's heart raced seeing them. She wanted to run and hug them, but restrained herself. She knew the wound was still open. "Mom, you changed a lot," Patricia whispered, surprised. "Time teaches," she replied, with a slight smile but teary eyes. Ricardo, on the other hand, didn't disguise his contempt. "You look good, but that has a price, right? I bet some man supported you all these years." The words hit like a punch, but Lúcia didn't back down. She just stared at him in silence, firmer than ever before. Meanwhile, Jusara, the mistress, watched closely. 6 years of cohabitation had taken a heavy toll on her. What was once youth and boldness was now weight and fatigue. The relationship with Alberto no longer had brightness. Arguments, demands, constant jealousy. And faced with Lucia's renewed figure, Jusara felt the shadow of insecurity. She, who once won through intrigue, now realized that victory was slipping through her fingers. Alberto tried to regain control of the scene. "You have nothing here anymore. You left through that door as a traitor, and you'll continue being one." Lúcia remained calm. She looked into his eyes, then into the children's. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I don't need anything from you. I just came to look at my children and show that I didn't break." Heavy silence fell. Patricia swallowed hard. Ricardo turned his face away, irritated. Gabriel, however, couldn't hide it. A small smile escaped, full of admiration. Her presence affected everyone. The serenity, the posture, the silent beauty. Everything contrasted with the memory of the destroyed woman they had expelled. Ricardo, although trying to maintain hardness, felt a corrosive doubt being born. Patricia, for the first time, perceived cracks in the narrative she had always heard from her father. And Gabriel. Gabriel simply saw before him living proof that his mother had never been the monster painted by Alberto. That night, back in the room she rented in the neighboring city, Lúcia cried silently, not from pain, but from relief. She had taken the first step. She had shown she wasn't defeated, but she also knew it still wasn't enough. She needed the truth, and the truth, sooner or later, would find a way to reveal itself. Lucia's return had shaken everyone, but not enough to break the wall of lies that Alberto had built over the years. Her children, poisoned by distrust, weren't ready to believe, and once again she felt the weight of rejection. A few days after her arrival, Patricia invited her mother to dinner at home. It was an unexpected gesture, almost like a test. Lúcia accepted, her heart racing with hope. She dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but to show respect for the reunion. She brought a simple cake, made by her own hands, like she used to do. When she entered the living room, the 3 children were there, along with Alberto and Jusara. The atmosphere was tense. There were plates on the table, but the silence was sharper than any knife. Alberto took the floor. "I see you knew how to get by well these years. New car, new clothes. You even look younger." He smiled with sarcasm. "Of course we know how that happens, right? A woman alone doesn't get all this without help." The words hung in the air, venomous. Lúcia closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deeply, and responded calmly. "I worked. I fought. I fell and got up. Everything I have came from my effort." But Ricardo snorted, disbelieving. "Oh, Mom, please, don't try to fool us again. Dad was always clear. You found another man, and that's why you're like this now." Lucia's heart tightened. It was as if each word from the children was a hammer reinforcing the prison of a lie. She looked at Patricia, seeking support, but her daughter averted her eyes. Only Gabriel stared at her, serious, as if he wanted to believe but was still afraid to say it out loud. Lúcia felt a stab in her chest. It was like reliving the expulsion scene. The silence, the looks, the accusation without defense. 6 years had passed, but the wound remained open. "Do you really believe I would be capable of destroying our family for another man?" Her voice trembled. "I dedicated my entire life to you." No one answered. Only Alberto's cold look, triumphant, like someone who had just reaffirmed his power. Lúcia finished dinner in silence. She ate almost nothing. She left the cake on the table. No one had even touched it. When leaving, the night was cold. She walked to the car with heavy steps, feeling that all the effort of recent years had shattered in a few minutes. Inside the car, she finally let the tears fall. But at the same time, something burned inside her, a flame that said it still wasn't the end. At the gate, while she left, Gabriel remained standing, staring fixedly at his mother's car disappearing around the corner. He hadn't said anything that night, but inside him, a doubt began to grow, silent and implacable. And Lúcia, without knowing, was about to find in her youngest son the ally she had always hoped for. Gabriel couldn't sleep since the dinner when his mother reappeared. The homemade cake she left untouched on the table haunted him like a cruel metaphor. He remembered the way she arranged the plate carefully, as if she were offering not just a dessert, but a piece of herself, and everyone ignored it. That gnawed at him. That night, lying in bed, Gabriel listened to his siblings' footsteps, Yusara's muffled laughter in the living room, and his father's deep voice discussing politics on TV. Everything seemed normal, but inside him there was a storm. What if my mother is telling the truth, he thought. What if everything I heard during these years is nothing but a lie, repeated until it became truth? He remembered the small details that no one else seemed to recall. The mornings when she woke up early to prepare coffee, the patience with which she mended torn socks, the way she hugged him when he was afraid of thunder. That didn't match the image of a treacherous woman, selfish, capable of destroying her own family. But, at the same time, his father's voice echoed strong. She deceived you. She didn't love us. It was as if two worlds were fighting inside him. It was on a rainy afternoon that fate decided to act. Gabriel was alone in the living room, doing a school summary, when he heard the sound of Yusara's cell phone vibrating on the sofa. She was in the kitchen, with the pressure cooker whistling, and probably hadn't even noticed. The device kept vibrating, insistently. He tried to ignore it, but the screen lit up, showing an audio message received in a group called Confidences. The title, in highlighted letters, seemed to scream at him, "I need to vent." His heart accelerated. His hands sweated. He didn't want to be invasive, but something bigger pushed him. With a trembling finger, he pressed play. Yusara's voice sounded through the speaker. It wasn't the firm voice of every day, but a tired, dragged voice, loaded with guilt. 6 years, and I still dream about that night. I wrote that letter myself. I invented the betrayal story myself. I knew that if I put that in Alberto's hands, he wouldn't hesitate to expel her, and it worked. He believed everything. I got what I wanted, the house, the name, the position, but the weight of this lie kills me a little every day. Gabriel remained motionless. The sound of the pot in the kitchen disappeared, only the sound of his heart hammering in his ears. He repeated the audio once, then again, and once more. Each repetition seemed to open a new cut in his soul. He let the phone fall on the sofa and brought his hands to his face. Tears came without control. Everything he had believed for 6 years was crumbling before a simple voice file. His mind raced back in time. The night he tried to hug his mother and was pulled by his brother, her face soaked with tears under the rain, the suitcase thrown on the ground, the gate closing behind her like a death sentence. He was only 12 years old at that time, and now he understood. His mother hadn't left by choice. She had been sacrificed. When Yusara returned to the living room, still drying her hands on the dish towel, Gabriel looked at her as if he were facing a stranger. She noticed a different look. "What's wrong, boy? Do you have a fever?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He got up slowly. His voice came out low, but cutting. "It was you. Me. What did I do now?" She laughed nervously. "You destroyed my mother's life. You wrote that letter. You lied." For a moment, Yusara paled. Her hands trembled slightly, but soon she recomposed her expression, trying to maintain control. "Be careful what you say, Gabriel. You're tired, imagining things." "I'm not imagining anything. I heard it." He raised the phone, still with the screen lit. "I heard your voice. You confessed everything." A heavy silence fell between them. The rain outside beat on the tiles, like a slow drum. Yusara tried to approach. "Gabriel, listen. I did what I needed to do. Your father was unhappy. I was unhappy. She was no longer part of this family." "She was the family!" He exploded with tears in his eyes. "You stole her life. You stole our mother from us." Yusara swallowed hard, lost. But instead of asking for forgiveness, she let escape a bitter whisper. "Your father will never believe you. Never." He breathed deeply, wiped his tears, and responded firmly, "Maybe he won't believe, but I believe, and that's enough for me." He turned and left, slamming the door, leaving Yusara alone, pale, with trembling shoulders. Back in his room, Gabriel threw himself on the bed. Tears returned. But this time, along with them came something new. Determination. He closed his eyes and remembered his mother teaching him to tie his shoelaces with infinite patience. The time he fell off his bike and she ran, desperate to help him. The goodnight kiss, simple, but that made the whole world seem safe. How could anyone say that a woman like that would be capable of betraying? No, it wasn't true. It never had been. He turned to the side and stared at the darkness. The clock showed 2 in the morning, then 3, then 4. Sleep wouldn't come, but inside him, a certainty grew. He could no longer remain silent. It was time to tell the truth. It was time to give back to his mother what had been stolen from her, dignity. Before dawn, with red eyes and still trembling hands, Gabriel took his phone and wrote just a short sentence, which carried the weight of his entire heart. "Mom, I need to talk to you. It's important." The message was sent, and on the other side of the city, in the small room where she lived, Lúcia woke up to the sound of the notification. She read those words and felt, for the first time in 6 years, that maybe life was about to change. The following morning dawned heavy. The sky was covered by dark clouds, as if the entire city sensed that something important was about to happen. Gabriel, with deep dark circles and a racing heart, got up determined. That would be the day he would reveal the truth. On the way to school, he couldn't concentrate on anything. He didn't listen to classmates' conversations, didn't pay attention in classes. His mind only repeated Yusara's audio, each word like a nail driven in. In the afternoon, he asked his father for everyone to have dinner together. He said he wanted to talk about something important. The firm, unusual tone made Alberto agree without suspecting. And so, in the dining room, the table was set. A strange silence hung in the air. Yusara arranged the plates with forced calm. Alberto looked at his watch every minute, and Gabriel's siblings exchanged complicit looks, as if they knew he was preparing some kind of juvenile rebellion. When everyone sat down, Gabriel took a deep breath. His heart seemed like a drum box. He looked at each one, then placed his phone on the table. "I need to say something." His father raised his eyebrows, impatient. "What is it now, Gabriel? About Mom?" The word mom was like a punch. The atmosphere changed instantly. Alberto frowned, Yusara held her breath, and the older siblings huffed, as if they already knew the direction of that conversation. "Gabriel, we've talked about this 1,000 times, said the oldest, Daniel. "Stop dwelling on the past." But he didn't back down. He took his phone and with teary eyes said, "Then listen to this." He pressed play. Yusara's voice echoed through the room. Sentence after sentence. The confession filled the environment like a poison that could no longer be hidden. "I wrote that letter myself. I invented the story. I got what I wanted. The house, the name, the comfort." No one breathed. The sound of cutlery falling on plates was the only sound. Alberto's eyes widened, his face hardened. Daniel and Ricardo exchanged stunned looks, and on the other side of the table, Yusara trembled like a child caught red-handed. That doesn't prove anything," she tried to stammer, but her voice failed. "It's your voice," Gabriel said firmly. "Your voice confessing what you did." Alberto stood up suddenly, the chair scraping across the floor. His eyes were red, full of fury and disbelief. "This is a lie!" he screamed. "It can't be! Yusara, say something!" But Yusara couldn't speak. Tears streamed down, and her whole body trembled. She tried to compose herself, but the truth was already exposed. "I warned you." Gabriel raised his chin, for the first time facing his father as an equal. "I warned you. I wouldn't stay quiet." Alberto collapsed in the chair again, hands on his face. 6 years believing a lie. 6 years rejecting the woman with whom he had shared an entire life. 6 years poisoning his own children against their mother. The weight of that fell on him like an avalanche. Daniel was the first to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. "So, Mom never, Gabriel replied. "She was a victim, unjustly expelled." Ricardo pressed his hands against his head, as if he wanted to crush his own thoughts. "My God, what did we do?" he murmured. The room was plunged in sepulchral silence. Each one relived in seconds the years of coldness, accusations, Cruel words thrown at Lúcia. Giusara finally broke the silence, but not with her usual arrogance. Her voice came out like a thread, almost a whisper. I thought I was fighting for what I deserved. I loved your father. I wanted the life she had, but I never thought I would carry this weight. The words came out between sobs. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. Maybe she couldn't even manage to. But the mask had fallen, and now everyone saw not the strong and seductive woman who had taken Lucia's place, but a broken figure, corroded by her own poison. He took a deep breath, wiped his tears, and stood up. He looked at each face at the table and finally spoke firmly. I've already decided. I'm going to live with Mom. The sentence fell like a bomb. Giusara choked on a sob. The siblings' eyes widened, and Alberto, stunned, just stared at him, unable to react. I can't erase what happened, Gabriel continued, but I can choose which side I want to be on from now on, and I'm going to be with her, because she was always with me, even when you said she wasn't. Alberto tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. He just stayed there, motionless, staring at emptiness. Maybe for the first time, he felt the real weight of the injustice he had committed. Giusara cried silently. The siblings didn't know where to hide their faces, and Gabriel, with his heart in pieces but his soul finally raised, left the table, walking to the door. He turned only once and said, "If you want to keep believing in lies, stay. But I've already chosen the truth." And he left, leaving behind a family in ruins. The night was cold when Gabriel got off the bus, carrying only a backpack on his shoulders. The streets of the simple neighborhood were silent, illuminated by yellowish streetlights. Each step was heavy, but at the same time, liberating. For the first time in 6 years, he felt he was walking toward the truth. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with messages from his father, his siblings, even from Giusara. He didn't open any of them. He didn't want to hear excuses, threats, or justifications. He just wanted to reach her. When he stopped in front of the small rented house, he took a deep breath. The rusty gate creaked when pushed. Inside, through the window, a faint light could be seen, and sitting at the table with a book in her hands was she, Lúcia. His heart raced. His legs trembled. For years he had dreamed of that reunion, but now that he was there, he seemed like a boy again, and it was at that moment that she raised her face and saw him. Lucia's expression was one of disbelief first. Then, as if time had stopped, her eyes welled up. She stood up slowly, her hand covering her mouth. Gabriel, he couldn't answer. He just ran to her and hugged her with all the strength in the world. And in that embrace, suddenly, the 6 years of distance, pain, and silence dissolved. They both cried together in silence. The smell of coffee still on the table, the creaking of the chair beside, the cold breeze entering through the window. Everything seemed distant. The only thing that existed was that embrace. "Mom, forgive me," Gabriel sobbed. "I believed everything. I turned my back on you. I didn't know." She caressed his hair, wiping tears with tenderness. "My son, there's nothing to forgive. You were a child, led by lies. What matters is that now you're here." He looked into her eyes, still crying. "I heard the truth. I heard her voice confessing. I know everything." She sighed deeply, closing her eyes. There was no hatred in her expression, just a serene sadness, like someone who already expected that the truth would one day come to light. "I never needed them to believe in me," she said, with a firm but sweet voice. "I just wanted you to remember who I was one day." Gradually, Gabriel told everything: the audio, the confrontation at the table, his siblings' reaction, his father's silence. Lúcia listened in silence, pressing her hands on the table like someone reliving each blow, but also like someone receiving a long-awaited confirmation. When he finished, she just said, "Truth always finds a way to appear, sooner or later." He wiped his face, looking at her. "So, can I stay here, with you?" Lúcia smiled, a simple smile, but one that illuminated the entire environment. "This has always been your home, my son." The next day, early in the morning, Lúcia went to the market with Gabriel. There was no luxury, no ostentation, but as they walked together, carrying bags and laughing at simple things, there seemed to be more dignity there than in the mansion where he had lived until then. The neighborhood people, curious, greeted them. Some whispered, remembering the story spread years ago. But seeing Gabriel beside his mother, head held high, the narrative seemed to begin changing. It was as if, little by little, the truth began to be rewritten. 2 days later, Alberto appeared in front of the house. There was no anger in his expression, no arrogance. He seemed aged suddenly, shoulders drooped, lost look. Lúcia opened the door. The silence between them was heavy, full of memories. He tried to speak, but his voice choked. I don't know how to begin, he murmured. She remained firm, but serene. Then don't begin, just listen. And for the first time, Alberto remained silent before her. Lúcia didn't pour out hatred or resentment. She just said, I won't carry poison in my heart. What you did has already been done, but I choose to move forward. Not for you, but for me and for our son. Alberto lowered his head, discreet tears falling. He knew there was no going back. She didn't want him back, and deep down, he understood. But there was something greater there, forgiveness that doesn't restore marriage but frees the chains of the soul. In the following days, Daniel and Ricardo also appeared, ashamed, insecure, asking for forgiveness. Lúcia received them without hostility, but without immediately opening her arms. Forgiveness is a path, she said, and you'll have to walk it step by step. You don't rebuild 6 years of absence in one afternoon. They accepted in silence. It was fair, and for the first time, they recognized the strength of that woman they had underestimated. That Sunday, Gabriel and Lúcia went together to the neighborhood mass. He held her hand firmly, without fear of anyone's gaze. During the homily, the priest spoke about truth that liberates and forgiveness that heals. Lúcia closed her eyes, and silent tears streamed down. They weren't tears of pain, but of liberation. It was as if life finally returned to her what had been stolen. Dignity, voice, the right to exist without shame. On the way out, a neighbor approached and commented, Dona Lúcia, after everything you went through, you can still smile? She replied with simplicity, but with a strength that made Gabriel proud. Those who carry resentment don't live. They just survive. I chose to live. Gabriel hugged her. At that moment, he understood that his mother hadn't just survived injustice. She had been reborn, and with her, he was also reborn. The years of lies wouldn't be forgotten. The scars would continue there, reminding what malice and envy can do. But at the same time, it was these scars that made Lúcia's smile even more beautiful. She wasn't just the woman unjustly expelled from home. She was the woman who fell, got up, resisted, and came back stronger. And in the heart of the youngest son, who chose to be by her side, there was a certainty that would echo forever. Truth may take time, but it always finds its way.